In 1981, Eve Arden sold her 38-acre estate to Sophia Loren. Most people thought she was just downsizing. They didn't know the truth. Behind closed doors, the bills were piling up. Medical costs, property taxes, and a husband whose death 3 years later would break something inside her. She had earned millions over her career. She had raised 4 children. She had made audiences laugh for 6 decades. But by the time she reached her final years, the fortune was nearly gone. What really drained the bank account of radio's highest-paid woman? Eunice Mary Queddens came into the world on April 30th, 1908, in Mill Valley, and from the beginning her life never settled into an easy rhythm. Her father, Charles Peter Queddens, painted signs, but never managed to keep steady income coming in. And by 1910, his gambling problems pulled the family so close to ruin that Lucille had no choice but to leave him. She took her daughter with her and refused to let the collapse define their future. Lucille opened a small millinery shop and threw herself into the work because she had to. But she also saw something bright in little Eunice. That spark kept growing as the years went by, and as the bills piled up, she kept pushing her daughter toward the world she once dreamed of entering. What began as a survival move slowly became the foundation of the wit and independence that would carry Eunice into the spotlight long before the world learned to call her Eve Arden. By 1914, when she was just 6, she was already stepping onto makeshift stages in San Francisco. Lucille had once been chosen from a group of 20 actresses for a professional troupe, and she poured every bit of that experience into her daughter. The shows were small, but the training was serious. Eunice learned how to feel a crowd and shift her timing to match its rhythm. She learned to land a line so it didn't just get a laugh, but got a moment. While other children spent their weekends playing in dirt roads or learning beginner lessons, she spent hers memorizing lines and studying reactions. Those early nights shaped her instincts, and she grew up believing that audiences were something you listened to as much as something you performed for. The stage wasn't a dream to her. It was normal life. As she moved into the 1920s, she tried on names the way other young women tried on hats. Eunice Queddens, Eunice Query, Evelyn Arden. Nothing felt quite right until 1933, when the Ziegfeld Follies cast her and told her she needed something cleaner, something elegant. She looked at the bottles on her table, saw Evening in Paris perfume beside an Elizabeth Arden compact, and picked her future in one breath. Eve from one, Arden from the other. The name slid into place like it had been waiting for her, and by the time the Follies opened on January 4th, 1934, it already felt natural. The name captured who she wanted to be in a world where glamour mattered almost as much as talent. And once she started using it, the world reacted. It was the kind of name that stayed in people's heads. After she graduated from Tamalpais High in 1926 at 18, she chased the stage with the kind of determination that ignored exhaustion. She joined the Henry Duffy Players and earned $35 a week, which stretched thin even back then. Stock theater didn't allow rest. She rehearsed one show while performing another and memorized lines on streetcars and in borrowed dressing rooms. Some weeks ran 6 days. Others quietly turned into 7. When the company moved to Los Angeles, she followed, living in a cramped room and pushing through weeks where $50 was all she had. Yet every show hardened her timing, sharpened her instincts, and deepened her range. She played roles back to back until her muscles ached and her voice thinned. Those years became her real training school, one grueling performance at a time. By the time she turned 20 in 1928, she had already built the character that would follow her for the rest of her life. Audiences loved her sharp tongue, and the way she could make a line cut without breaking her calm. Directors saw it and kept using it. She became the wise friend, the quick thinker, the woman with the perfect comeback. That talent kept her steadily employed and brought her into more than 20 films within a few years, but it also locked her into a type that limited her pay and her opportunities. Even when she delivered brilliance, studios used her as seasoning, not as a centerpiece. She lightened scenes for stars who earned far more than she did. She understood the game early and leaned into it, even when she knew it kept her from the roles that paid better. She made the most of it, scene after scene, and eventually, the industry couldn't ignore her. Everything shifted when she stepped onto the Broadway stage in 1934 for the Ziegfeld Follies. The production opened at the Winter Garden Theater and ran 182 performances, pulling in crowds with names like Fanny Brice and Judy Canova. Producers poured more than $250,000 into it during the Depression, a number that stunned even people inside the business. Eve earned somewhere around $75 to $100 a week, which felt luxurious compared to her earlier stock days. Yet the gap between chorus salaries and star salaries was impossible to miss. Fanny Brice earned as much as $1,000 a week. Eve felt the difference, but did not let it slow her. The job gave her visibility, and that mattered more than the paycheck. Her real breakthrough came 5 years later with Very Warm for May, which opened on November 17, 1939. She played a dizzy society matron and slipped into the world of Kern and Hammerstein as if she belonged there. She performed All the Things You Are and showed Hollywood that she wasn't just sharp lines and fast jokes. Even though the show collapsed after only 59 performances, scouts noticed her. Her voice, her stage presence, the way she handled a song, all of it pointed toward a future that was bigger than Broadway. One flop was enough to start a new chapter. Hollywood brought its own set of challenges. Starting in 1937, she took what the studios gave her, which often meant small roles for small pay. In 3 years, she worked on more than 20 films, sometimes earning only $100 or $150 for an entire project. Stage Door in 1937 gave her a small part that Gregory LaCava expanded because she kept stealing attention from the corners of scenes. She worked constantly, yet her annual total stayed under $5,000. Her marriage in 1939 to Ned Bergen came during a period when Hollywood preferred single starlets and punished actresses who settled down. She adopted her daughter Liza, and later Connie, even though raising a family could have cost her more opportunities. She chose it anyway. Through all of this, the pay gap stayed wide. While male character actors climbed toward $750 a week, Eve kept earning a fraction of that and held on because the work mattered. Her life took a sharp turn again in 1945 when she stepped into Mildred Pierce as Ida Corwin. Director Michael Curtis had watched her long enough to know she had something different. Her performance added warmth to the film and lifted scenes in ways that critics immediately noticed. The film earned more than $5,000 in profits, and her role became one of the reasons people kept talking about it. The next year, she received an Academy Award nomination, standing beside Anne Blyth as both actresses from the same film competed for the same title. Joan Crawford earned $500,000 for her deal, while Eve received a fraction of that, yet she never let the numbers show on screen. Her timing in every scene proved why people loved her. Behind the scenes, tension brewed. Crawford felt Eve's lines were landing too well, drawing too much attention. Both women stayed professional in public, but the set carried an edge. Eve kept working, kept shaping Ida into a standout who could challenge and support Mildred at the same time. When the awards came and went, she lost to Anne Revere from National Velvet. a reminder that the Academy almost always leaned toward dramatic roles over comedic ones. Still, that nomination pushed her value higher. Her pay rose to somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 a picture, though she still earned less than male actors in similar positions. The praise lifted her career, but the pay gap stayed in place. Everything changed again in 1948, when CBS offered her the lead role in Our Miss Brooks. The network had already approached Shirley Booth, Joan Blondell, and even Lucille Ball before the script finally landed in Eve's hands. She almost turned it down because she wanted a break, but her polished audition on June 23, 1948, sealed it. The show premiered on July 19, 1948, and grew quickly. Within months, she collected 4 awards, and by 1952, her salary was renegotiated to $200,000 a year, equal to about $2,300,000 today. She joked during her 1949 Listener Award speech about winning Mr. Boynton if she held on to the title twice, playing along with the charm that fans adored. She even became an honorary member of the National Education Association despite never studying beyond high school. The show kept climbing. When CBS moved it to the 6:30 p.m. Sunday slot, ratings rose until it reached 6th place nationally by the 1952-53 season. Over 9 seasons, the show aired 368 episodes and stayed sponsored by Colgate-Palmolive Pete the entire time. Yet behind the success lived a different story. She didn't love the role. She accepted the renewal because $200,000 was impossible to ignore. Co-stars remembered her quiet frustration, though she always kept her humor. Real schools offered her teaching jobs because they believed the intelligence she played on the radio was real, but she gently declined. She said she only played Connie, as she remembered her 3rd-grade teacher, Miss Waterman, from the convent school she once attended. During the height of the program, she spent her days filming movies and her nights performing radio. From 1949 to 1953, she appeared in 11 films while keeping the show alive. The 1947-48 season alone saw her playing the best friend in 4 different productions. The only reason she got a vacation when the radio show launched was because CBS recorded the first episodes in advance. When Frank Stanton called her during that short break to say the show was a hit, she knew life was about to change again. After the TV version ended, she stepped away from film work until 1959, when she appeared in Anatomy of a Murder with her husband, Brooks West. Looking back, her single Academy Award nomination from 1945 stayed one of her brightest milestones, but the long career that followed proved she never needed a trophy to shine. In 1952, everything in Eve Arden's life started moving faster than she could catch her breath, and the pace never slowed for years. When Our Miss Brooks shifted from radio to television that year on CBS at 9:30 p.m. every Friday night, Eve kept the job she already had and gained a second one on top of it. She was earning $200,000 a year, which was a stunning figure at the time, yet that money came with a price because she had to live 2 versions of the same character every single week. She performed the radio show, which had been running since 1948, and then turned around and filmed the television version. Week after week, this routine stretched her thin, and by the time the radio show finally ended in 1957, she had kept this pace for almost 5 years. Still, she never let the exhaustion touch her performance. Every line stayed sharp. Every pause stayed deliberate. Audiences never saw how hard she pushed herself to keep both worlds alive. The television version did far more than survive. It exploded. As the show settled into the 1953-1954 season, Nielsen rankings placed it firmly in the top 30 every week. And at its height, the weekly audience hovered around 15,000 viewers. That kind of number transformed Eve into a face people recognized everywhere. It also made teachers across the country admire her. since the show treated their profession with warmth. The National Education Association honored her. A Connecticut teachers' college gave her an award in 1952 for humanizing the American teacher. Some school boards even offered her real teaching jobs because they truly believed she could handle a classroom with the same grace she brought to the screen. She always smiled and declined those offers, knowing she had never gone beyond her own high school education, yet the gesture meant something to her. Then came February 11, 1954. The 6th Primetime Emmy Awards turned into a landmark night for Eve because she won Best Female Star of a Regular Series for her 1953 season work. She beat Lucille Ball, Imogene Coca, Dinah Shore, and Loretta Young, and she accepted the award at 45 years old, a time when actresses were rarely celebrated for leading performances. It became her only Emmy win, though nominations followed in 1955, 1956, and 1958. That first win meant everything because it arrived when television itself was still shaping its identity, and Eve became one of the stars helping define the medium. Her personal life kept shifting beneath her during these years. Her first marriage to Ned Bergen had ended in 1948, leaving her with 2 adopted daughters she raised alone for several years. In 1952, she married Brooks West, who appeared in 26 episodes of Our Miss Brooks, and together they adopted a son named Duncan. Then, in 1954, something unexpected happened. Eve became pregnant after believing for years that it was impossible, and she gave birth to her biological son, Douglas. With 4 children and a 38-acre farm in Hidden Valley full of animals that made the place feel almost pastoral, she built a life that gave her solace outside the studio. Even as Brooks West struggled with drinking, their marriage lasted until his death decades later. At work, she refused to go through the motions. When she felt the writing was slipping, or when the character lost dignity, she spoke up. She even halted production once until the team agreed that Connie Brooks deserved more than endless jokes about longing for Mr. Boynton. Her insistence was met with labels like difficult and demanding. Men who made the same demands were praised as professionals with high standards. She kept pushing anyway. Her stubbornness helped keep the show sharp, though very few people realized how much of the final product came from her decisions behind the curtain. In 1956, the story took an unexpected turn with the film adaptation of Our Miss Brooks. The movie erased the show's continuity and introduced Connie Brooks to Madison High, as if audiences had never met her. It followed her through a fresh storyline and ended with her marrying Mr. Boynton, something that never happened on radio or television. The radio show had been running since 1948, not 1953, as people sometimes misremember, and the television version lasted from 1952 to 1956. The film closed a chapter while rewriting the past. After the television show ended in spring 1956 due to declining ratings, Desilu Studios tried to recreate Eve's television success with the Eve Arden show the following year. It aired on Tuesdays in 1957 and carried sponsorship from Lever Brothers and Schulten, yet critics immediately sensed that the character felt too much like Connie Brooks, transplanted into another setting. Audiences agreed. The show ended after 26 episodes in 1958, leaving Eve with the realization that recapturing Lightning was harder the second time around. Money kept coming in, with her salary during the height of Our Miss Brooks remaining at $200,000 per season. But that didn't change her complicated feelings about the role. She seldom spoke about it in interviews. Richard Crenna later said she didn't really like playing Connie Brooks. Years after the fact, she softened a bit and told friends it wasn't half bad. Still, Hollywood locked her into one idea. She became the wise-cracking authority figure, the schoolteacher type, and the industry showed little interest in letting her stretch beyond that identity. Between 1957 and 1960, she returned to film work. One of her strongest roles came in 1959 with Anatomy of a Murder, where she played Maida Rutledge, the dry and loyal secretary to James Stewart's character. Her husband Brooks West appeared in the same film as the prosecutor. Reviewers admired the way she eased humor into a largely dramatic movie. Many people on set remembered her quietly knitting between takes, as if the chaos around her never touched her sense of calm. Yet as the 1960s unfolded, the landscape shifted again. Hollywood had little room for actresses over 50, especially those associated with a comedic style that belonged more to the 1940s than the modern era. In 1960, she appeared in The Dark at the Top of the Stairs, but major roles faded after that. Sergeant Deadhead in 1965 offered only a small supporting part. The industry had moved on, and she found herself auditioning for roles she would have ignored years earlier. Television kept her visible, though in a different way. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, she appeared on shows like Bewitched in 1966, The Man from UNCLE the same year, Ellery Queen in 1975, Maude in 1977, and Alice in 1980. These appearances were brief. One scene here, a short moment there. She often played authority figures or clever older women, echoes of the character audiences still associated with her. She also tried to reclaim the stage. In the mid-1960s, she took on Dolly Levi in the touring production of Hello, Dolly, stepping in for Carol Channing for 17 weeks in Chicago. She later joked that she got the job because she could fit into Carol's costumes, a reminder of how their paths had crossed decades earlier when Carol served as her understudy. The performances earned her the Sarah Siddons Award in 1967, yet critics were split on her interpretation. They loved her comedy, but felt the warmth required for Dolly didn't match her sharper style. Even so, the stage remained a place where she could show the craft she had built over many years. Commercials became part of her career as well. She appeared in ads for Crest toothpaste in the 1960s and later became a spokesperson for Imperial Margarine in the mid-1970s. These jobs paid well and kept her in front of audiences even as television and film roles became scarce. For someone who once carried an entire network sitcom and earned top dollar, this phase felt like a step down, but it offered stability during a time when Hollywood wasn't offering much else. Then came 1978. Grease hit theaters and introduced Eve Arden to a new generation through the role of Principal McGee. She appeared in only a few scenes, yet every line had that dry timing that made her famous. The film's 1950s setting created a strange loop in her career, letting her step back into an era she once helped define. The movie became a massive success, but Hollywood still saw her as a nostalgic figure rather than someone who could drive contemporary stories. She returned for Grease 2 in 1982, which became her final film appearance. At 70, she remained as sharp as ever, yet the industry had already decided where she fit in its world. By 1981, the rhythm of Eve Arden's life was already slowing, and that was clear when she sold the place that had once symbolized stability and success. That year, she let go of her 38.5-acre estate at 1151 Hidden Valley Road in Thousand Oaks, California, selling it to Sophia Loren and her husband, Carlo Ponti. The house was not modest by any measure. Built in 1950, the Craftsman-style main residence stretched across 4,253 square feet, with rock walls, heavy beamed ceilings, 4 bedrooms, and 5.5 bathrooms. There was also a guest house, a pool house, staff quarters, 2 swimming pools, a barn, and even an orchard. Loren renamed the property La Concordia, meaning harmony. No official record ever confirmed what Eve received for the sale, but years later, the Loren family sold the same estate in 2006 for $6,900,000, after first listing it at $8,900,000. At 73, Eve was quietly simplifying, stepping away from the burden of maintaining such a vast property, even though she still owned valuable real estate and had lived comfortably for decades. Around the same time, her career was easing into its final stretch. On June 11, 1982, she returned to a familiar role as Principal McGee in Grease 2. The sequel carried a production budget of $11,200,000, almost double the cost of the original Grease, yet it brought in only $15,000 at the domestic box office. That number looked especially weak beside the original film's $132,000 haul. Even so, Eve delivered the same sharp, dry humor audiences remembered, sharing the screen with a young Michelle Pfeiffer in her first major starring role. It became one of her last appearances on film, followed only by a role in Under the Rainbow later that same year. By then, at 74, her schedule had slowed dramatically. The woman who once worked non-stop was now making only occasional television guest appearances through 1984. During the height of Our Miss Brooks, she had earned $200,000 a year, but those peak years were long behind her. Then, in early 1984, the ground beneath her gave way. On February 9th, her husband Brooks West died suddenly at 67. Some reports cited heart failure, others a brain hemorrhage. What never changed was the impact. They had been married since 1952, sharing 32 years together, working side by side in theater, television, and film. Brooks had appeared on My Friend Irma during the 1952 to 1953 season and toured with Eve in stage productions of Mame, Little Me, and Under Papa's Picture. He also appeared with her in Anatomy of a Murder. They raised 4 children together: Liza, Connie, Duncan, and Douglas. After his death, Eve's manager Glenn Rose said plainly that she never truly recovered. She had been married to Brooks for more than 3 decades, and his loss tore away the emotional anchor of her life. Grief pushed her inward, but it also pushed her to write. On June 28, 1985, she published her autobiography, 3 Phases of Eve. The book traced her long career, her family life, and most painfully, the devastation of losing Brooks. She filled its pages with stories of Hollywood, including encounters with Joan Crawford and the Marx Brothers, but much of the book became a love letter to her marriage. Reviewers noticed that the early chapters sparkled while the later ones jumped through time, focused heavily on family, and felt uneven. That made sense. She wrote most of it in the 8 months following Brooks's death, working through loss by putting their life together on paper. She was 76, and the book became less about fame and more about holding on to memory. After that, her health began to unravel. Friends noticed she withdrew, stopped attending gatherings, and lost the spark that had carried her through a 60-year career. Depression settled in deeply. By the mid to late 1980s, she was battling heart disease and cancer at the same time. Between 1985 and 1987, doctors treated her for colorectal cancer, worsening heart problems, and severe arthritis that made everyday movement painful. At 77, she needed constant medical care, including cancer treatments, heart specialists, and home assistance. Annual medical costs likely reached between $50,000 and $100,000, an overwhelming sum for the time. Insurance coverage for elderly performers in the 1980s was limited, and much of the expense came directly out of her savings. Chemotherapy weakened her, heart medications became essential, and arthritis limited her independence. Month after month, the bills kept coming. In 1987, she appeared on Falcon Crest at age 79. That short appearance became her final acting paycheck. After that, the income stopped. She had no residuals to rely on, no new roles ahead, and no endorsements. The woman who once earned $200,000 per season during Our Miss Brooks now depended on what remained of her savings and Social Security. Her 4 adult children still needed support from time to time, stretching her finances even thinner, just as her own needs grew heavier. She remained in her Beverly Hills home in the Doheny Estates area, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Property taxes alone during the late 1980s ran between $10,000 and $20,000 a year. When combined with insurance, utilities, and maintenance, monthly housing costs easily reached $2,000 to $3,000. Without steady income, the house became a financial trap. Selling luxury property during the late 1980s downturn was difficult, and whether by attachment or circumstance, she stayed. What made the situation harsher was the absence of residual income. Our Miss Brooks continued airing in syndication throughout the 1970s and 1980s, yet Eve received nothing. Contracts signed in the 1940s and 1950s gave networks permanent rerun rights without additional payment. CBS made money for decades, while Eve saw no return. Despite once earning $200,000 a year from the show, she had no passive income left to support her in old age. By 1989, the collapse was complete. Medical bills, housing costs, and basic living expenses drained what remained of her savings. At 81, she was living month to month. The fortune earned between 1948 and 1957 had vanished over time, spent on living well, raising children, and surviving illness. Her autobiography brought in only a modest amount, nowhere near enough to reverse the damage. On November 12, 1990, at 9:30 p.m., Eve Arden died at her Beverly Hills home from cardiac arrest caused by arteriosclerotic heart disease. She was 82, though some records claimed she was 83, a reminder of how age was often blurred in Hollywood. 2 of her children, Duncan and Liza, were with her at the end. The moment was quiet, far removed from the laughter she had brought to millions. Behind the heart failure was another truth. For the final 12 to 18 months of her life, she had been fighting colorectal cancer in private. Friends were shocked by her frailty when she attended the Warner Brothers studio rededication ceremony in the summer of 1990. She left early, exhausted and in pain, having kept her diagnosis largely to herself. When she died, the numbers told a brutal story. Over her lifetime, she earned an estimated $2,000 or more, equal to roughly $20,000 to $25,000 when adjusted for inflation. Yet she left behind almost nothing. Medical costs, property expenses, and debts consumed what remained. Unlike peers who invested in studios, production companies, or real estate portfolios, Eve relied almost entirely on acting income. The Beverly Hills home was either heavily leveraged or sold to cover expenses. Her children inherited little after final bills and obligations were settled. Her life became a quiet warning. One of radio and television's highest-paid women ended her days without financial security, while networks continued profiting from her work. Eve Arden's story exposed how Hollywood treated its character actors, rewarding them during their prime and abandoning them when age and illness arrived. Long after her death, audiences still laughed at her reruns, unaware that the woman on screen had paid for that laughter with everything she had.